Okay, so I'm sharing my screen here. I think you can see it. Um, like I said, I do not have specific feedback to give to any one of you. All of you got a high grade. Continue doing what you're doing. But I understand that under time pressure, this can be a little bit difficult. And so I'm going to tell you some tips for today, um, how to avoid, you know, a stressful situation. And I'm also going to add a little bit of extra time. You're my last class of the evening, of the day, so I will provide extra time if you want to. For example, you're writing by hand, right? If it's messy, if you cross some things out and you just want to rewrite it so it looks better, or you want to, things are not in the right order and you just want to put them in the right order. To me, this is not a test of your language. This is like an issue with the test itself, so I don't mind you taking the extra time to do that. And I also think writing a commentary in 90 minutes is a very inauthentic activity. So I understand if there are some issues there. So we're going to talk about today how to narrow down your examination, and I'm going to give you some tips, or I'm going to explain to you exactly how the test is going to look like. So for being here, the three of you are going to really know exactly what I'm going to do next week. I'm not going to tell you the content 100%. That would be unethical, but you're going to have a great idea about it, and you can probably already start thinking about some things and memorizing them so you are not caught flat-footed on the day of the exam. Okay, so next week you'll come in like a normal class. You'll have an article. I asked you guys months ago what you would like to have for a topic, and unfortunately, they're very different because everyone is quite advanced in their college career now, and they're focusing heavily on their concentration, on their Fach, right? And there were a lot of different things. Something that came up three times, though, was something with social media and something with tourism. So I'll probably uh, do that. I'll do something related to maybe social media and its effect on tourism, uh, or how companies can leverage social media for tourism, the drawbacks of tourism, of social media and tourism, right? So, like, there are a lot of nice pictures of Hallstatt. I'm not saying it's not a nice place, but I think it's very different in person than on Instagram, and maybe over tourism there. So something like that is going to show up. And indeed, today's article, the practice article, is quite similar to what you're going to experience. Now, what I want to tell you is I'm going to provide this to each student next week, this commentary pack structure. I'm not going to have phrases like, while the strategic pivot presents short-term gains, that would be feeding you vocabulary and language. I can't do that, but I'm going to attach to the test this structure, contextualize the business case or problem, define the scope of the commentary, thesis or key argument, et cetera, et cetera. So you're going to have this outline here on the day of the test, so you don't have to memorize that. I think I promised this a long time ago, and I'm going to follow through with it. But there are going to be no example phrases. All right. Now, I don't know if you want to, I don't have this in writing, so if maybe make a bullet point notes of this. It's a 90-minute task. Don't waste too much time on the introduction. Don't spend too much time on the introduction. It's not that important. So when you can contextualize the business case or problem, you can define the scope of the commentary and have your thesis in about 3 sentences. You don't need more than that. So you can say something like the article titled blah 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 blah, written by blah blah blah, published on blah blah blah, deals with, or the case under discussion around company X efforts to avoid da 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 da. That's one sentence. And then you say this commentary focuses on evaluating whatever is the topic, one sentence. And then you give the main thing that you're going to talk about in your commentary. What's your main, excuse me, what's your main point here? don't spend so much time writing a long introduction, okay? Because you only have that short period of time. You need at least 20 minutes to read the article and make notes, minimum, I would say. And then you need the rest of the time to write, by hand, so you're kind of under pressure. Then I would spend, like you could say, this is a lot to do in 90 minutes, and I get it. So you could identify the problem uh, quite, quite, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say shallow, but you don't have to go so deep into the problem identification and analysis. If you want to use a SWOT analysis with like a bullet point here and there, some people did that for their homework. That's okay. But really, what you want to focus on the meat of your commentary is here, the evaluation of decisions and actions and recommendations, which can be lumped together into one thing. That's the bulk. That's the bulk of your test. That's really what you should be focusing on, right? So the article next week is going to be a little more detailed than this one. It's going to explain the decisions that maybe a company has made or a corporation, and you can evaluate those decisions and you can make further recommendations for the future. Today's article doesn't really have a specific company in mind. It's just to kind of warm you up to the topic, to get you thinking about the topic for next week. But this is where you really want to focus, 3 and 4. I'm not going to worry so much about a conclusion and an introduction when you have only 90 minutes. If this was something that you had weeks to do and was like a paper, I would focus more on that. But I understand the nature and the parameters of the test. So sorry, just the last time. I don't mean to be a broken record here. This is the meat of your test right here, 3 and 4. And you want to talk about the decisions made, what are the impacts short term and long term, what are some actionable solutions, why you think those are solutions, and what are some potential risks of the solutions that you offer. Or if you don't have any solutions of your own, you can expand number 3 and talk about the solutions proposed in the article, why they're good or bad, and what are your recommendations or analysis of those solutions. Now, the 3 of you guys didn't really have a problem with that in your commentary for homework, so there's not much else I could say. I just know that testing is a different scenario than having all the time in the world. Any questions about what I've said so far? Try to remember some of these phrases here. I've been saying it throughout the entire course, right? It's not, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's not really a difficult thing here to just remember maybe one phrase from each section. And remember words like mitigate, exacerbate, ameliorate, allocate, synthesize, envision. If you just remember these words, you're going to be fine. So you will have this on the day of the exam next week. And let's look at the article, and I'll just give you some quick tips here. Here's the article. It's about 1,000 words. I think it's somewhere between 800 and 1,000 words. Um, this one is kind of vague about tourism. Next week, I will choose a specific company, maybe something like Airbnb and how they contribute to over tourism or unfair tourist practices. Maybe it'll be about the impact of social media on tourism, but you can already start thinking the main idea of next week's test is going to be over tourism, mic tourism. And what I mean by mic tourism, like McDonald's tourism, is everything is really inauthentic. Its goal is to sell you something rather than have an experience, and maybe how some companies are, or how a company is guilty of this, and how another company is fighting this. So we might talk about issues of sustainability in the article. So keep that in mind. That's probably going, and when I say probably, it's definitely going to be the nature of your exam. Um, I'm also going to include this next week as well, guiding questions. So I understand that there might be pressure in an exam situation like, shit, what do I actually feel about this? What is my opinion? I can't really muster up an opinion in this short period of time. And even if I can, I can't form an opinion that is, I can argue with validity. So I'm going to give you some questions so you can even read them before you begin the article so you know what you're looking for. Um, and that you're not like desperately grasping for information here. You don't have, it's not like answering, you have to answer all of these questions. You do not have to. They're just to help you. But if you already have a strong opinion about it and you have personal experience, excuse me, then you don't have to answer any of them. They're just there as a guideline, or as guidelines and something to help you. Okay, so here's what I recommend. Here's how I tackle a commentary, or how, I mean, I haven't even written one in, I think, since high school, so we don't really write them in college. So here's how I would tackle a commentary. Again, you guys did very well. Maybe you don't need any of this, but maybe the time pressure is something that you're worried about. As I read, um, and this is what I teach in KF, I summarize each paragraph with either a word or a sentence. So like the second paragraph, I might summarize, it's a short paragraph, but I might summarize it, purposes of tourism. That's just what I write next to the paragraph. And then the next one, I write drawbacks of tourism. So I know that this is the paragraph that talks about negatives, so I can go back and pick information out of there. So I usually summarize each paragraph with a word or a sentence, and then if it's midway through the commentary, it's not the introduction anymore. We're talking about information that is useful for my commentary. I also write myself a note, agree, disagree, on the fence. On the fence obviously means I don't have a strong opinion either way. So w- your commentary is less like a KF one where you just have to explain, do I agree or disagree? But still, it's a good thing to simplify the process, um, so you're not constantly going back and forth and thinking, what do I think about this? What do I think about this? What do I think about this? So I also write myself a brief, like a bullet point or a sentence, why I disagree, why I agree, why I'm on the fence. This makes the whole process easier for me when I start writing. So basically, what you want to do is create a little bit of an outline for yourself. I know this is not a common practice for shorter texts, but I think if you do even just a 5-minute outline here, the writing process becomes less of a daunting task, so less difficult. And then you have a structure. Or you can just write next to the paragraph problem, or recommendation one, recommendation two. So you know this is what you're going to focus on. When you're under time pressure like this, narrowing down your analysis might be difficult. Okay, so as I said, this is quite a simplistic article. It's quite a simplistic article. It's not as detailed as the one you're going to get. I don't mean that the article you're going to get is going to have more words. It's just going to have more things for you to discuss. It's going to have more specifics. So I think actually next week's article will be even easier than this one. The language of next week's article might be a little more difficult than this one. But I think it'll be easier for you to analyze than this one. So here's what I would suggest doing. You're welcome to do it now. You can do it on your own time. I'm going to record myself doing this anyway, whether you're here or not. What I would do is read the article. I'm going to do that myself, and I'm going to write the notes that I would if I were taking the test, and then I'm going to show how I would put it into a an analysis or a commentary for this course. Do you have any questions thus far? Okay. Uh, I would say it's up to you. I'm going to on my end, I'm going to put this into a Word document and I'm going to like format it in the right in the way that I would do on the test. So I would say you have 20 minutes to read this and do your own thing, and then we can compare. Or if you want to do this on your own time and compare later, you can leave. I would say though, if you have any further questions in about 20 minutes, you can either ask them now or I'll answer them in about 20 minutes. But I've just asked if you had any questions, and I guess nobody did. So what I would do is shut off my microphone, begin this process, and I'll come back. And if you're here, we'll discuss it together. And if not, uh, you can watch the recording. So, yeah, good luck. Sorry, so that people who, did not attend can hear this as well. And if you can go back and watch it. Again, this is not a test of your honesty. This is not a test of your overall business knowledge. This is a course that should be directed towards acquiring language and utilizing language. So, for all of you, I don't care if you lie on the exam, you make up examples to support your argument as long as they are articulated in a more sophisticated way. Not just like company needs to, they have to do this and it's going to be good because I think it's going to be good. Just having that good analysis with some good language. I don't expect perfection. I'm not evaluating you on a native speaker level, but I do expect like language from the commentary pack and from the course. Okay, so what do I mean by that? As you can see, I just copied, this is already highlighted. I copied some things. So I hope you're able to memorize them, or at least parts of them later, and I change them around. Here's my document. Now, what I wrote here in italics, and this is something you have to keep in mind, is you have to go with the nature of the text you are given. This text doesn't have anything about a company in it, right? And I promise you next week I will give you specific companies. But this text has nothing about a company or companies making decision. It's purely conjecture. It is uh, purely hypothetical, right? It's not talking about Airbnb or the Austrian government in great detail. So there are no real decisions being made by anyone here. There's nothing really to evaluate, only things to recommend. So even though I've given you a structure for a commentary, it doesn't mean that you have to stick to that structure dogmatically, that it has to involve all those things. You can't possibly do that in a 90-minute test anyway. So you have to be flexible. What you can do here is identify the problem. There are a lot of things mentioned here that are problematic and make recommendations. Those are the two things that are easiest to do with this particular text. Okay, so be flexible. I've given you a roadmap, I've given you the structure, but that doesn't mean it has to be exactly like that every single time, especially in a 90-minute task. So here's what I did as I read. This is just the introduction. It's just telling me what I'm going to read. And I wrote my little summaries here. Positives of tourism could be useful later in recommendations. Like I could make recommendations based on fostering cross-cultural exchange. Like I could think about tourist programs that encourage, language exchange or people to meet one another or local guides, something like that. So that could be useful later for recommendations. I wrote, here is the problem, not in great detail, meaning we're talking about environmental degradation, but the article doesn't say, here's what's happening in Venice specifically, or here's what's happening in Austria specifically. It's quite vague, but it gives me enough information to say, okay, here's a problem, here are some problems. I can make up an example or I can use an example that I know of. Then here I wrote opportunities. If I want to write a brief SWOT analysis, that would be the weaknesses up here or threats, and this would be the opportunities. Here I could also think of recommendations. I could combine this paragraph with this paragraph, the positives, the opportunities, and think of something to do in one paragraph, which I have and I will show you in a minute. I wrote here where governments can step in. And me personally, I know about Bhutan. I don't know if you're familiar with this country. You have to pay, I think, somewhere between 150 to 300 euros every day just to stay in the country. So I know this is my personal experience, and therefore they do not have a lot of tourists from the West. Most of their tourists are either from India, China, or neighboring countries, but I know an Austrian who went there and said it's one of the cleanest countries. There are almost no tourists there, and it was worth it for him for a couple of days. So I thought about that. Here, governments, I didn't summarize anything here because it didn't tell me anything really new. It was just like adding more information, vague information, nothing I could really use. So I skipped it. I didn't write anything. If I was on the exam, might just write an X next to it. Don't need anything here. And I found more problems here. So when I write problem next to these things, I even if they're different parts of the article, I know I when I write my commentary, my analysis, I can group, I can even if the paragraphs are far away from each other in the text, I can group them together in my analysis. So yeah, I just wrote myself some questions here too. What can I say about this paradox? This paradox here was people, new Gen Z, millennials, they want more experiences than luxury. But this doesn't match with cheap airlines and cheap accommodations and all these, discounts and rolling discounts and w ways companies are trying to pull you in. So I wrote, I think this is like the main idea of my analysis is there's a paradox. And the problem is larger than low-cost airlines. We live in a culture where we want to show things on social media. We want things immediately. We want a lot of things. So can this even be fixed? So that's something really to think about. So I wrote it there, and then I wrote about a personal experience I had, and I came to the conclusion as I was reading. My main recommendation for this, even if it's not plausible in real life, is that what Venice is doing, putting a cap on tourists. I think even Barcelona wants to do this, but there's a lot of discussion in their governments if this is even possible. Um, that's my main solution and my main recommendation here is to put a cap on the number of visitors you have a year. And as you can see here, we have some good vocabulary. You can use it like economic reliance, influx, far-reaching. Take words from the text and use them. That's not plagiarism. What plagiarism is taking full sentences and just repeating them. But if you see good vocabulary in the text, use it. That'll help you. All right, so here's what I wrote about. Here's my basic commentary, and I told you the introduction can just be a few sentences. It looks more than it is. All I did was take some of the phrases from the introduction in your commentary structure pack and add things. So the case under discussion revolves around issues in tourism in the modern era. There's no company, right? Next week you'll have a company. There's no company here, so I just wrote issues in tourism in the modern era. You got to be flexible, specifically over tourism and the paradox of generating tourism-based income in economies without negative consequences. This analysis focuses on evaluating the pivots and strategies governments and companies might take and explores their implications. While a strategic pivot, this is my thesis. Yeah, my thesis is going to be there needs to be a cap and maybe more authentic tourism. So my thesis is while a strategic pivot presents short-term losses, the long-term sustainability of the approach could result in a new era of tourism that reduces massive returns but enables tourism over a longer period. I don't know why there's an end here. I want to finish that. So basically, I just memorized the phrases and I plugged in some information there. I started my next sentence. Firstly, the core issue facing countries is the degradation of life for it. So I just copied the structural pack, the commentary structure pack again. Um, I'm just curious, maybe you could pop it into the chat. What are some of the main problems that this would be helpful to me just to see that we're on the same page here? What were some of the main problems that you saw in there that I didn't add, that I don't haven't added here, that I don't have any specific examples? Can you give me some specific examples in the chat from the text? That would be quite helpful. I'll give you a couple of minutes. Shut my microphone off while you do that. Yeah, great job, guys. So in this next paragraph, I would mention these things. I would talk about sustainability issues, small businesses suffering, like some Viennese coffee houses are suffering. I would use an example in comparison to Aida, which is a chain there of coffee houses that attracts tourists. It's very like colors are very intense, and it's a recognizable strain infrastructure. There are a lot of issues with public transportation. Traditions getting lost. That's a good one. Instead of saying get lost, just remember, guys, are lost. Try to avoid using get plus the third form of the verb. Use is, am, are, was, were, has been. That's stronger grammatically. Displacement of local residents. These are the damage to the natural ecosystem. Great. These are all perfect. I would mention them in my first paragraph. I would focus a sentence on each of them, a sentence on increased carbon emissions, an example if it gives you it in the text. So like it doesn't give it to you here, but let's say in the text it said the number of buses or cars in a city or something like that. Um, trash, or it gives you a trash collection, trash the synthesis of trash. So that would be if it mentions that in the article, or if it specifically mentions a marginalization of small businesses, like I just did, like smaller Viennese coffee houses versus the chains. Everything is kind of becoming a bland mix, an amalgam of like McDonald's and easily recognizable things. Mention your problem in one sentence, mention an example in a specific the next sentence, do the same with the other. So you guys nailed it. Your one paragraph, or you could, if it got too long, you could split it into two paragraphs about the problems and talk about these things utilizing specific examples from the text. I know this particular article doesn't have specifics, so don't worry about that. You've got everything you need here. So I would add the information you gave me into this section. Firstly, the core issue facing most countries is the degradation of life for residents. All of that is degradation of life for residents. And disconnect, like Irina mentioned, we now have a disconnect between preferences, so the McTourism situation going on. So this is a good topic sentence for all of the things you've mentioned. So I said you got to go with the nature of the text. We don't need to evaluate any decisions being made because there weren't any mentioned. So let's talk about the one paragraph I wrote. You could even break this into two. You could break it, you could do that like this if you'd like, just so it looks better. But I'm not, as long as your analysis isn't one giant paragraph, I'm not too picky about when and where you make paragraph breaks. So let's just leave it together for now. If you were writing a thesis paper or a paper for a class, this would be a fine size for a paragraph. Doesn't matter. So I took the phrase to mitigate, and that is a verb we've used very often in this class, to mitigate the risk of further complications regarding over-tourism, and in an effort to avoid exacerbating the situation. So exacerbate, also a word from class. A cap on monthly or annual tourists could be a useful measure. And then I made up some stuff here. I actually had the personal experience near I think it was the Hofburg. Don't know if it was Hofburg. Yeah, it was Hofburg, where I got stuck in an actual human traffic jam. My cousin came for a visit. He wanted to see this, and we turned a corner after the Hofburg, and we were literally stuck in a mass of people down a alleyway, down a Gasse. And it took us 20, 25 minutes to get out of it. People were panicking. Some people almost got trampled. So I use that example here. I explain, I give my point. Governments and business owners need to think more carefully about long-term versus short-term gains, as the short-term gains result in breakdowns in infrastructure, legal issues, and growing dissatisfaction among residents that could result in overall policy change that does not favor industries and business owners. Anyway, whew, long sentence. I'm not expecting the exact kind of sentence like that, but I'm giving you the overview, and now I'm giving a specific example. For example, situations like human traffic jams have occurred regularly in Vienna during the Christmas season. This has resulted in injuries, crippling lawsuits, and outrage from city residents who have issues commuting to work or simply buying groceries or having a coffee. This is another good verb you guys need to start using more often. To result in. It can change the nature of your sentence. I see a lot of people constructing or forming sentences and phrases incorrectly because they're lacking the active use of this verb. So, two good pieces of vocabulary are to result from. So, when you're explaining the cause of something, this results from, so you're telling me the cause, and this has resulted in is you're telling me the effect. So this has resulted in community action that has called for an end to tourism on a much higher level than if a cap were introduced. While this may result, I took this exact phrase from the structure pack. While this may result in a short-term market loss, adopting such a model might result in tourism that is not significantly impacted overall. As such is another good phrase to mean um, as a result. And it's a simple one to remember. I think it's also considered quite formal. As such, businesses and companies need to redirect their focus holistically. Holistic is another good vocabulary. It means looking at the big picture, right? As opposed to temporary wins. If you wrote something like this with some of the vocabulary from class and there was a mistake or two, or not everything was perfect, I would still be inclined to really give you a lot of points here because you give me a very clear idea of what has to be done and then how it should be done with some specific examples. So that's what's important is the analysis with some good vocabulary. Did any of you guys, I'm just curious to see what you came up with. Did maybe you can do the same thing in the chat. What are some recommendations you had for the situation? What are some things you thought of while reading? So you can pop that in the chat again, and we'll go over it. I'll give you a few minutes to type it out. That's a good example. Just so you know, this is the word. Subsidies is when something is subventioniert. So yeah, that's a really solid explanation or justification. Maybe the government. So for people who are going to watch this recording, I don't know if they can see the chat. I don't think so. So it says here, maybe the government could allocate, good use of the word allocate, subsidies for traveling by train. Yeah, I mean, you even have a real example of that. You have the Klima ticket, right? For residents of Austria. Maybe they could offer even something to tourists in this capacity that encourages tourists to maybe not use Uber or taxis or other things and use more of the public transportation. But you could also acknowledge the consequences of that. This still could have, this doesn't solve issues for residents in the city who depend on public transportation. And I can tell you, living in New York and growing up there and working there, we constantly have a lot of tourists, and they sometimes create an issue in rush hour. Um, I think my mom has a negative, even though she's visited me many times in Germany when I lived in Germany, I think she has a negative opinion of Germans just because there were a lot of German tourists who took the train at rush hour with giant backpacks and created kind of problems for residents, standing in the way and just taking up space. Eco taxes or taxes for short-term rentals like Airbnb, great. That is a great initiative as well. So companies like Airbnb or Booking, I don't know the nature of Booking.com. I don't know if they just offer, I don't really know how different they are from Airbnb, but that's great that these properties now have to pay an eco tax. Maybe they should even pay something like an ownership tax. I mean, I know that exists. There's already some kind of income tax, but as Airbnb and Booking get more popular, people buy more real estate so they can use it for tourists, and this creates a general increase for residents in the cities. So maybe that would even be a useful thing to maybe transition more towards classic things like hotels or something. I don't know. I haven't thought this out in great detail, but yeah, that's a good initiative as well. So you guys are thinking on the right track. Maybe keep this in mind for next week. Like I said, I might do a company I will definitely do a company that has something to do with tourism, and the complications that arise in a city. And I might choose a specific city exactly. Could be Vienna, could be Venice, could be New York City, could be Berlin. But these kind of issues are probably going to show up in general. So the business area is going to be the hospitality and tourist industries. That's the business area and company I just haven't decided yet. Let's see what Arena has to say. Shift the focus of tourists on small local businesses by good marketing strategies and the help of hotels. Yeah, definitely partnerships between, what we call in English mom and pop shops. So those small businesses as opposed to the large chains and conglomerates. It's going to be a tough thing to shift tourists' focus from the things they easily recognize, like McDonald's, Hilton, these things that have brand recognition to small businesses. But I think it's worth a try, definitely. And I think people who are of a younger generation are I think young Europeans, young Americans are definitely interested in this kind of thing. Good recommendations. Now the question is, should you use all three of these recommendations? Should we use Arena's recommendations, Vitora's recommendation, and Arena's recommendations? Or should we focus on one? The answer is I can't tell you that. It depends how comfortable you are and in the time limit and how many arguments you have for each. If you have strong arguments for one of them, maybe two, three arguments, I would recommend staying with just one answer, right? But if you're like, "Ugh, I have these good ideas, but I don't have like too much evidence for each of them," then maybe utilize all three arguments. The thing is, you don't want to overextend yourself in a test scenario, right? You don't want to aim too big. You don't want to cast a net that is too large, that you end up too shallow on each of them. So you have to decide that spontaneously. But I've already given you some things to think about for next week. So maybe if you're someone who is working in the sustainability field or studying something, and that's where you want to go with your degree, maybe focus on sustainability issues. I think I know Arena has a good background in AI, this sort of industry. So maybe you want to focus on how the digital transformation can affect some change in this regard. So I don't know. I haven't thought in great detail about this. You could talk about. I can't give you a way off the top of my head how AI could be utilized to correct some of these things. But I know how digital marketing could be used in a better way, or digital platforms could be leveraged in a better way. So yeah, you can focus on something like that you feel strongly about, that you feel well versed in, that sort of thing. Now, let's talk briefly about conclusion, because I told you the introduction is not a huge thing. I wouldn't focus so much on a conclusion either. So what I would do is you have the conclusion here, summarize key points. I would skip the reinforce the thesis unless you have the time, and then maybe just give a future projection, a final thought, or call to action, right? That so your conclusion is enough if it's 2 to 3 sentences as well. We're looking for the main part to be numbers 2 through 4. And remember, be flexible. If there aren't any decisions and you can't criticize the decisions, just give your own personal recommendations. If the article is very heavy on decisions made, like a couple of weeks ago we had Wendy's and their dynamic pricing system, that's one where you could focus very, very in detail why it's a bad decision or why it's a good decision or why it's both. And then you can give one short paragraph about your recommendations. You have to be flexible in these situations. You have to work with what is given to you. So even though this is a great way to succeed in general, you have to know how to employ it correctly. All right, so conclusion, don't stress too much about the conclusion or the introduction. Just memorize some phrases and focus on the beginning. Focus on the middle of this commentary structure. Additional tips, use evidence, right? Use as much evidence as you can from the article itself. When you're talking about specific examples, don't be vague. Okay, this article was vague in general, but the Wendy's pricing article was not. It was very detailed. So you can focus on specific things, the specific evidence, the numbers, the facts, the outcry. So you can focus on very specific things. Aim to offer a balanced critique. This is something that I'm told for this course is a good thing, but it doesn't always have to be a balanced critique. If you feel specifically one way about something and you can argue that better and utilize better language for that, you're not going to be punished if you don't have an extremely balanced critique. It's just sometimes good to acknowledge some of the arguments against you. Like if you're making an argument, it's sometimes good to just very briefly say, while this may be, good, may be crucial or helpful or this or that, there are some consequences or some issues. Just acknowledging that can help. And when I say formal tone, just use the vocabulary we've learned in this course. It's not rocket science. There's not a million things from this course that you have to remember. We didn't meet as often as I would have liked. But you've got the vocabulary that you need to succeed. And I saw in the 3 company presentations that I've already had students employing and utilizing them very, very well. And it just sounds better. It sounds more professional. It sounds more C1 level. Okay, I would say we're approaching an hour and a half here. That's it from my end, really. But I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about next week, about the protocol of the test, or anything about company presentations you're feeling unsure about. Can I do anything for the 3 of you guys? And if you're too shy, you can also pop it in the chat. Or if you think of something in the meantime, you can send me an email. Was there anything maybe you give me some feedback here. Was there anything lacking in this examination today? Is there anything I mean, I guess this would be a question if you'd have a question, but is there anything missing that you need some clarification on? Something in the chat. Hold on. Okay, nothing, no question. Yeah, for you as well. No problem. I'm sorry it came at the end here. It took me a long time to find my feet in this course, and it was very confusing for me. So I'm glad that it provided some clarification for you guys. Yeah, in the end, it's English, right? It's not your main focus. Don't stress too much over it. Employ the tactics that I've given you, and yeah, you'll be fine. And especially you three, you have great commentaries. You've done great commentaries for homework, so it's just improving on something that's already very good. Okay, then. I wish you guys a nice Friday, a good weekend, and if anything comes up from now until next Wednesday, feel free to reach out to me. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.